Welcome, everybody, to our evening of the third installment for the webinar series for Riverkeeper. Today, we have tales from the river, and we are joined by Tracy Brown, President Tracy Brown as moderator, as well as Captain John Lipscomb and filmmaker Jon Bowermaster. Just a few ground rules before we dive deeper into tonight's topic. We're going to have everybody keep their questions to the end. Of course, you can put your questions into the Q&A if you would like, and we will make sure that we log those, and we'll take a look at your questions, make sure that we answer them tonight. Another is if you need closed captioning, it is available. You just go to your panel, click on the three dots, and you should see captions as the third option. Click on that and it should turn on. And if we're not able to get to your question at the end, you could feel free to send me a message, and I can definitely forward it to our panelists tonight. So with that, I can turn things over to Tracy.
All right. Thanks, Katie. Thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us this evening. We're really excited to get started with Tales from the River. So for folks who don't know and maybe haven't been to a Riverkeeper event before, Riverkeeper protects and restores the Hudson River from source to sea and safeguards drinking water supplies. We bring together a unique combination of tools to carry out our mission, including science, law, community partnership, and on-the-water patrols. In today's webinar, you'll be hearing about the work we accomplished from our patrol boat, from Riverkeeper's boat captain, John Lipscomb. And John will be speaking with filmmaker Jon Bowermaster, who has spent many hours aboard our patrol boat with John, documenting the Hudson and Riverkeeper's essential work as her eyes, ears, and voice. So before I introduce our two speakers, I just want to share some Riverkeeper updates. As you can see from the slide and the links in the chat, we have recently launched a special campaign called the Captain's Fund, and our aim is to raise funds to support our patrol boat and captain in perpetuity. If we reach the goal of 3.5 million, then this funding can serve as an endowment to assure that Riverkeeper always has a presence on the water. So right now, we do our fundraising annually for all of those costs, and I think you'll agree after you hear the discussion tonight just how essential it is that Riverkeeper continue these patrols, and you'll share our passion for safeguarding that work. So please consider making a donation, and again, that link is in the chat, and we'll share it again later. And then the second bit of news I wanted to share is that on June 20th, coming right up, at the beautiful Boscobel estate overlooking the Hudson in Garrison, we'll be celebrating John's quarter of a century of service to the river at Riverkeeper's Summer Splash Party. So we would love to have some of you join us there. It's a great annual gathering. It's a great party, delicious food, nice music, amazing people who all are of like minds, really caring about clean water and our beautiful Hudson Valley. So those links are in the ticket. Those tickets are in the links as well. So hope you'll consider coming out. So it's my pleasure now to introduce to you the person who can really best express the value and impact of Riverkeeper's patrols, our very own boat captain and VP of Advocacy, John Lipscomb. John joined Riverkeeper in 2000, and for the past 24 years, he's been patrolling the Hudson River aboard the beautiful R. Fletcher, which you can see in the picture on the screen. She is a 36-foot Chesapeake Bay style wooden vessel. And from April to December each year, he travels approximately 4,000 nautical miles between New York Harbor and Troy, seeking out and deterring polluters, monitoring tributaries and waterfront facilities, conducting science, supporting a variety of scientific partners and Riverkeeper's own scientific work, and also taking out regional decision makers, members of the press, and anyone else for whom we want the river to make a connection and give the river a chance to advocate for itself. So since John's been with us, he has traveled the Hudson River about 80,000 nautical miles. And then speaking with Jon tonight is our other Jon Bowermaster. Jon Bowermaster is a writer, filmmaker, adventurer, and a valued partner here at Riverkeeper. He is a 6-time grantee of the National Geographic Expedition Council. He's one of Nat Geo's Ocean Heroes and one of Riverkeeper's Hudson River Heroes. Jon has written 11 books and produced and directed more than 30 documentary films. He's also a radio host. And for the past several years, Jon and his One Ocean Media Foundation, Ocean 8 Films team, have been focused on a series of short films about the environmental risks and hopes for the Hudson and the Hudson Valley. So really looking forward to the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Jons.
Hi.
You got this, Jon. What about the other Jon?
We got Jon.
Oh, we got the two Jons.
We got the Jons.
Well, I'm not used to seeing you when you're not standing behind the wheel of the boat.
Well, I'd rather be there.
Yeah. But you weren't on the river today, but I drove across the Kingston Rhinecliff Bridge a couple of times. It was a beautiful day to have been out there. But I thought it might be kind of interesting to remind people that a lot of what you've done, other than driving these 80,000 miles or whatever the figure is the advocacy part, which means time away from the boat, time away from the river, time kind of lobbying and being a kind of a presence with decision makers. And what were you up to? What were you up to today?
So today was a good day. I was not on the water. Today was a very good day. Because one of the things we try to do is, the whole game is protect the river. And one of the big risks to the river is the risk of an oil spill from a barge or from a derailment of a train on the West Shore rail line. And to add to what Tracy said earlier, we patrol up from New York Harbor to Troy, but we also patrol out the Mohawk River. And the Mohawk River is the largest tributary to the Hudson. And the freight line runs right along the north shore of the Mohawk. And the Mohawk and the Erie Canal are contiguous for 100 miles. And so we run out there, not every month, but every couple of months to have a presence there. And I've been going to these regional response team meetings. This is an EPA EPA Region 2 response team meetings for years and years and years. And I've been asking, we run a high risk of a spill from a train. We just had one in East Palestine. They happen every once in a while, and they're a disaster for a water body. And so I've been asking the EPA to organize a drill on the Mohawk rail line. And 6 years after we started asking, we just had it. So I just came back half an hour ago from Schenectady, where we had all the fire districts, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the EPA, all the hazmat people. And it was phase 1 of what we hope will be a series of exercises to prepare the response community on the Mohawk for the possibility of a spill. And I mean, it's a good example of the kind of work we do at Riverkeeper. We latch onto an idea, and then we stick with it, and hopefully sooner rather than later you get results. So today was a historic day. There's never been an EPA exercise on the Mohawk, so we are very happy with today. But it's an example of the kind of work that happens that doesn't get into social media, doesn't happen in the press, but it's important work, and it's core to our job of protecting the river and its tributaries.
And when Riverkeeper founder Bob Boyle first came to you with the Fletcher and the proposal that you take over as the patrol captain, what was your initial response?
Well, I was interested. I was very interested. I was running a boatyard at the time. I was running the boatyard in Upper Nyack where Riverkeeper brought the Fletcher to have the engine replaced. So I got to know Bob, I got to know the boat, and I'd been there for 10 years, and I was getting tired of the sort of the retail aspect of boat service and looking to return to an earlier part of my life where I worked with one vessel for a long period of time. And I love that relationship. especially with a wooden boat. So I was very interested, and I don't know quite why he asked me, honestly. I really don't know, but I was at the right place at the right time. He knew that I was an advocate because I had fought for various causes, environmental and otherwise. But yeah, I was very eager when he said, what do you think? I said, yes.
But by your own admittance, at that moment, you were more of a boat guy than an eco warrior.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about the Hudson's environmental problems. I was hired to operate the vessel for an environmental group. And as presented to me, I was going to be a team member. The rest of Riverkeeper staff were going to be doing the environmental work, but that's not how it turned out. The being on the water and learning about the issues that the river faces pulls you in, and I can't turn my back on those problems. So as I learned more about the river, I took on more and more and more. And we really created a role, a patrol boat captain role that hadn't existed at Riverkeeper before, in many respects. And, high degree of presence on the water, and using that platform to advocate for the river. That was kind of new for Riverkeeper.
And you pretty quickly started using the patrol boat as a deterrent.
Yeah, well, it was funny. I mean, there was you couldn't Google how do you patrol for a river. The boat the year before I started with the boat, it ran 40 engine hours, 40. Stop. So I couldn't go to the prior staff and say, so I want to do what you did. Bob Boyle told me.
Just for point of reference, how many hours do you do a year now? You said 40 hours the first.
Well, we've run 17,200 in 23 years on the water. So, 700-800 a year. But one patrol up to Troy and back is more than 40 hours. So in 1 month, we run more than the boat ran in the entire year prior to this position being created. And I thought about it, and I thought, how can you help the river by being on the water? And it's actually, I looked at how I react to a police car going down the street. If a police car is going zooming down the street, you without thinking, you say to yourself, well, there's something going on somewhere else, or it's the end of this guy's shift and he's going to go home. But he's not interested in what's happening here. But if that same squad car comes by the next day at 5 miles an hour, and the police officer's looking out the window, maybe taking some photographs as she or he go by your house, you start to look around and go, what's happening right here, right now? It makes you realize that patrol is interested in where you are right now. So that's what we started doing. We started running at 5 or 6 knots, which is 6 or 7 miles an hour. The patrol boat could go all the way to Albany and back, one day up, one day back. But we do that New York Harbor to Troy and back in 8 days, because we're sticking our nose in every community and every marina. And I believed that the boat would provide a deterrence. Now, you can't measure deterrence. You can't measure what doesn't happen. But there's one good story that I often tell that I think tells the story. When we run down to New York Harbor, I don't run on the Palisades Park side because there's no people. Where there's no people, there's no problem. So I run down the Metro North side, Irvington, Yonkers, so forth, down to the city. And you're running right along the train track. And one time we were headed down to Newtown Creek or wherever we were doing. This was quite a few years ago. And the listeners here, the viewers here will know that the train crosses many little streams. And so at Hastings, there was a construction crew working on one of these little bridges, only about a 50-foot bridge over a tiny little stream. And I looked you're going close to shore, and you're looking, and I saw that there were a bunch, they were putting new stone around the foundation of the bridge, and there was a bunch of this new white granite in the creek bed. Took a picture, uploaded it to computer, sent it to the environmental affairs officer for Metro North, Neil Gully, who's my partner. He's sort of like the police station and I'm the squad car. Neil Gully and I have cultivated all these contacts over time. I sent it to this environmental affairs officer at Metro North, sent the photo, and I said, something's happening here. The contractor's losing material into the stream bed, and that's no good. Sure enough, end of the day, coming back home, all the stone was out of the creek. And you'd think, okay, it's a tiny little thing, but we thought, okay, good job. Good job. Yay, yay, Riverkeeper. But as is often the case, the payoff is not what you expected, and it's not right away. Months go by, and I get a call from this same person at Metro North. And she says, I'd like to come to the office in Ossining with several of our construction engineers, not train engineers, construction engineers. I said, sure. We had a meeting, we go in there, and these guys come in and they all have these plans for work they're going to be doing at Ansville Creek, up at Bear Mountain, Croton Rail Bridge. And she says, and this is the payoff, she says, I wanted you to meet the job bosses on all these jobs and get their contact information, see what we're going to do, because we know that as you patrol, you're going to be watching. And we want you to be able to call if you have any questions. And so, great. There was never a problem. But what you take away from that story is that the property owner that controls the entire eastern side of the Hudson River to Poughkeepsie is aware that Riverkeeper on the water is watching everything they do. That's deterrence. And that kind of outcome strengthens your resolve to be out there and keep it moving.
Yeah. But you gained this kind of environmental knowledge, year by year, issue by issue. Obviously, there's a staff, who's not on the patrol boat who's working on these issues kind of day in, day out. It's a proverbial team effort.
Yep.
How did you how did you learn? There's no blueprint for how to patrol, there's no blueprint for how to learn these issues. It's just from running into people along the river. I've been out on the boat with you many, many times, and you're a very known quantity on the river. When you pull into docks, people recognize you and you have conversations with them and you learn about their community and their issues, etc. I guess that's the only way to there's no textbook.
Oh, there's lots of, we work with a large community of people trying to protect the river. So you learn from all your colleagues. We learn from the people at the DC. We learn from people at Clearwater. We learn from our colleagues in Scenic Hudson. We learn from locals in their communities. We learn from boaters. But the trick is being present and available for those interactions. And over time, you can't help but learn. Can't help but learn.
Well, then the one thing that I always remark on is, people, when you look at, even if you're out on the river or from the bridge above or from the shoreline, the river looks brown, murky. We've tried filming in the river, and you can't film much more than 6 to 12 inches below the surface because it's so muddy. But the way you describe it and the way we've witnessed it, there is a ton of life out there. How do you visualize that? How much life is below the surface of the Hudson.
It's one of the challenges. I've said to people on the boat many times, if the river were clear, we'd have a glass bottom boat, like in the Bahamas or the Keys. And you'd go out and you'd see the striped bass and the blue crab and the American eel and all those beautiful creatures. So one of the challenges is to invoke those creatures for people. And it's tough. It's tough. There are programs like, the eel counting project that Chris Bowser runs, where you actually get to see the baby eels. There's the sturgeon program that DC runs, where they capture, tag, and release sturgeon so they can, it's a census so that they can know whether the numbers, which are just at the bottom of red line, are rebounding or not. Right now, I'm sorry to say they're not. Sometimes you'll see it's what you read are these glorious stories of when the Hudson had more abundance. It's some of its historic abundance. And in the late summer, in the fall, these fish like shad and herring, they come into the river from the Atlantic to spawn. And they spawn in the Hudson because the Hudson is so rich with food. And their young are basically in an all-you-can-eat buffet for the whole summer. And they're bulking up because once they leave the river, as the river gets cold, they leave the river, they go out into the ocean, and it's a jungle out there. And there's predators. And so the stronger they get before they leave, the better chance they have. And there are stories, and I've seen it only a few times, because herring and shad numbers are so depleted from habitat loss and our overharvest as a society. But you'll see the young of year, they're called young of year. They're the little fish that were spawned in the spring and have grown to about that big, 3 inches. And they're in a school. And you'll be out in the river and there'll be some predator underneath, perhaps a striped bass. And the school will jump out of the water. And on a windy day, you can't see it or hear it. But on a calm day, you hear this whoosh. It's like you threw 5,000 pebbles out of your hand onto the water. And there's this whoosh. And out of the corner of your eye, you get a glimpse of these fish. And sometimes you see bunker. These are filtered, they're menhaden. They come in and they filter feeds, but it is a challenge to get the public to empathize with this giant organism of life, which is the river. It's tough. It's much tougher than in clear water. But the reason the Hudson is rich is it's not clear.
Right.
That's food. That's food, what we're seeing. A lot of what we're seeing in that murkiness is food.
Yeah. Well, and you'll remember this. We went up to the fall kill and we had cameras and we met with Chris Bowser from DC and he's such a great educator and he had a bunch of high school students down counting eels and picking up eels. And you came and you picked up eels with the kids. And it was kind of an interesting reminder because you spent a lot of time on the boat. And you hadn't really witnessed some of this stuff, some of this life yourself.
It was tremendous to see these little creatures, clear bodies. You can see their internal organs, and they've been out in the Atlantic a year, working their way back from the Sargasso Sea up into the coastal rivers and tributaries. I feel like when I see these little herring and shad and the migrations of the parents that come back, I feel like every single creature you're seeing is an Olympian because they've survived disease and predation and all kinds of sources of mortality. So the females and the males that come back to the Hudson to spawn are all champions. And I have to say, it makes it particularly heartbreaking for me when I see herring, coming back and they're being caught to be used as bait to fish for striped bass. It's heartbreaking for me because it doesn't respect the incredible will and survival that these adults demonstrate. You can fish for striped bass with a worm or a lure. Leave the herring alone, is my opinion. They're all Olympians.
Well, you can stop me or correct me if I'm wrong, but you grew up within kind of throwing distance of the Hudson River.
Yeah, I grew up in Terrytown and
right.
Irvington. I played as a kid on the little stream that goes down through Washington Irving's property in Irvington. That was my whole world, that stream. And
And learned to swim in the, I mean, you swam in the Hudson.
Yeah, I remember my father taking me down to Briarcliff Manor. There's a little beach, and I remember him holding his hand under my chest as I learned to doggy paddle.
And reflecting back on that, I mean, what was people's perception of the Hudson as you grew up? Were people were drawn to it, or scared of it, or they stayed away? I mean, what?
I didn't, as a child, I didn't have any negatives. You know, and I would have had negatives from the adults in my world. I mean, my father used to sail out of Tarrytown Boat Club in a 17-foot boat, and he'd go over to race in Nyack every weekend. And I would go with him. I didn't like racing. Too much nail biting for me. But I would go over and I'd just mess around on the shoreline at Nyack Boat Club while he was out racing. And in the summer when the water was warm, he had a little outboard motor for when it was calm, because it's 2.5 miles across. And he would tow me. I'd wear my life jacket and he'd tow me behind his little boat. And the dayliner would come by, and I loved the big swell that came out, the quarter wave that came out of the dayliner. Nobody ever talked about pollution to me as a child. And so I was, ignorance is bliss. And
but the relationship between people and the river has changed dramatically in the last 40, 50 years, because there was a period, even when you were growing up, when people stayed away from the river, concerned that it was dirty and polluted and too much. And today, what do you find when you travel up and down the river? What's the attitude?
It's still mixed. It's much more, many more people appreciate the river and have a better understanding of its actual health than before. But I'll tell you, it's an interesting thing. And using my home as Tarrytown, the waterfront in Tarrytown had an asphalt plant. It had a property where the fire department would burn cars as an exercise to learn how to put out burning cars. It had a General Motors plant that was built on fill in the marsh that had been the Pecanico River. My little town waterfront was an example of everything screwed up you can do to a shoreline. And when in this, I guess it was the 60s, when the government forced urban renewal, and the urban renewal buildings were built down by the shoreline, because that was the land the community was willing to give up for low-income housing. Fast forward 60 years, and now at Tarrytown, the GM plant is gone, the asphalt plant is gone, there's ball fields, and there's about 2,000 units of housing. My family doctor tried to buy a condo there, and he backed off because they wanted $1 million if you had a view of the river. 2,000 units of housing. So what we've done is the river was seen as worse than it was back then. And now it's actually seen by many as better than it is. And one of our challenges at Riverkeeper is to keep the heat on, keep people caring. They look out, they don't see garbage, there's no odor. And they've just paid $1 million for a condo to look at the river. And so what's wrong? There's no problem. River's fixed. But we all know the river's not fixed. And so it's actually a challenge to keep the pressure on, keep the public engaged, because a lot of the problems are not visible anymore.
Yeah. And I know that over the course of 20 plus years, you've had lots of successes and lots of frustrations. Biggest success story?
I can't really do that. I just had that question from somebody else. It's really, I mean, it's a third of my life.
Yeah.
And so you can't pick one thing out of a third of your life. But I'm super happy with the work we did early on in the early 2000s down in New York City, where we went into Newtown Creek, which is this waterway between Brooklyn and Queens, and it had been given up. It had been given up for lost. And in the northern end of Brooklyn and Greenpoint, there was between 17 and 30 million gallons of oil at the site of the old original Standard Oil refinery. It was a property then owned by Exxon, but Exxon didn't make the spill, but Exxon owned the property. And the waterway was black, just like the pictures you see from the Exxon Valdez or the Gulf spills, black. And we went in there in 2002, and one of our staff at the time was Basil Sagos, who became the DC commissioner, New York State DC commissioner. He just retired. And we had a staff of about 10, 12, I think, at the time. And we learned that EPA knew about this oil coming into the water from this underground spill. It's the largest underground spill in North America, in Brooklyn. And the DC knew about it, the EPA knew about it, the Coast Guard knew about it, everybody knew about it. And the mitigation measures that were in place were absolutely lame. And we decided we were going to sue Exxon. And I took you there today. It's not like Newtown Creek is the Club Med. There are a lot of other issues, but there's no more oil from that spill. And they're pumping oil and water out of the ground and have been. This case took us 8 years to 2010. They've been pumping oil and water out of the ground. Exxon calls it a recovery. They don't call it a cleanup. They call it recovering lost product. And they take and separate that oil and water, and they take the oil down to the refineries and process it. And so that was a David and Goliath fight, if there ever was one. And it was Riverkeeper at its finest. That's a great one. The water quality program that we built starting in 2008, I'm very proud of. It goes today. We just, 2 days ago, we christened a dedicated science boat for the purpose of for housing our water quality lab. We do.
Prior to that, the state did not monitor the water quality.
The state still doesn't.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
The state does not. And we do. Little Riverkeeper subsidizes the whole thing, and our members subsidize it. They make it happen. And the only source of information on sewage contamination in the Hudson River and the Mohawk and the tributaries and the Upper Hudson came from the Riverkeeper Initiative. So now we have this dedicated vessel, and it frees up our mothership to do other work. So it's, I'm very proud of that. Very proud that Riverkeeper followed up with the DC and was able to begin removing obsolete dams from tributaries so fish can get up into the tribs to spawn. We took down the very first dam in the history of the Hudson Valley, specifically for fish migration. And now there are more that have come down, and the project is well funded and it's growing. So there are a lot of things I'm proud of. I'm proud of the time on the water. I'm proud of putting in, you know, the effort. I'm proud of Riverkeeper now patrolling the Mohawk. The Mohawk is, as I said before, has been just trampled. You know, the Erie Canal was built right in its body. 20 locks, 20 dams, freight rail line on one side, highway on the other side. You could hardly think of it's hard to imagine how a river could be treated more poorly than the Mohawk. And the Mohawk did not have, back in the 60s when Scenic Hudson, Clearwater, Riverkeeper were all coming online, and this groundswell of environmental concern grew in the Hudson Valley, Mohawk was all alone in the dark. And we went to the Mohawk. And now there's a huge coalition of effort to help the Mohawk, help restore the Mohawk, protect the Mohawk, reduce sewage, and today's spill drill. So I'm very proud of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think I'm spilling any secrets here because I'm just a loyal reader of Riverkeeper's website, but my understanding is that this is your last season on the river as the patrol captain.
Last season on the river, running the boat for Riverkeeper, I hope not to have to leave the water. So I'll find a way to stay on the water. But
Yeah.
yes, I'm retiring from Riverkeeper this year. We had a search for a replacement captain, and you know, for me, that was very stressful because I wanted somebody, an A++ to take over the Fletcher. and to continue the momentum of this patrol effort. And we had several star applicants, I'm so happy to say. And we picked a young man who I think is going to be wonderful. And he starts in July, end of June. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. Helping him learn about the peculiarities of the Fletcher and how to take care of them. And then patrolling together to pass on history and future and challenges and ongoing cases. And then I'll help put the boat to bed in the fall, and then it's all his. But
Yeah.
I'll be on the river on another boat. You can't get rid of me.
It's not that easy.
You gotta kill me. You can't get rid of me.
Well, the last and biggest question, of course, have you told Batu about this transition? Does he know that he's about to be retired as the Riverkeeper dog?
Yeah, well, he's right here. Come on. He Batu, come on up. He's Batu is he's steady. He doesn't mind what we do. Whatever we do together, he's good. But he does love the water, and so we'll, like I say, we'll be back. We'll be back on the water. No chance of getting us off.
I think the line is you can't get rid of me now. It's too
Yeah.
late. Too late.
Yeah, that's right. You had your chance. You had your chance before, but you missed it.
Well, and we've had the opportunity to work together for a number of years, and we're working on a really great kind of update on what's new on the Hudson River with the patrol boat and you as kind of the thread winding us up and down the river. We've made that really powerful film about taking dams down and about the history of PCBs on the river. So I'm sure we'll lean on you going forward for expertise. But what I was thinking is that for this new captain coming in, you're going to be such a great source of information and knowledge, which you didn't have when you started. I mean, there was no one really to pass along information.
Yeah, no, and that's right. I didn't have that kind of a teacher. Plus, I had the boat sea time and the experience, but I didn't have any real environmental knowledge. I'd worked on environmental issues, but not in North America even. But this young man has worked on oyster restoration, so he comes in with a stronger start than I had. So he's poised to do great things in his career aboard the Fletcher.
Nice. And Tracy, are you out there? Should we do some? I don't know if there are
I
questions.
am here, yes.
Are there some
Would you like
questions?
to open it up for some other questions?
Yeah. As you like. Questions for Captain John. Well, Tracy looking sharp as always, but frozen.
On my end.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I unfrozen now?
There you go.
You're unfrozen.
Okay, good. I hope it wasn't too crazy looking. Okay, so great conversation. And as I said, at the open, John, you just bring such a great sense of the value of the on the water work and how critical, and really the on the water patrol work for Riverkeeper is kind of the defining essence of what makes us and the movement of waterkeepers worldwide unique. One of the, very base, entry-level requirements for becoming a waterkeeper on a waterway now is presence on the water, having a vessel and being on the water. So I think we could say John has written that book, certainly helped to write it. So we do have a couple questions, and I encourage people to add more at this point. But I will kick us off with, is there no protection or laws that would prohibit the taking of herring for bait?
There are some laws, there are some rules regarding how herring are captured. So herring try to get above the tide. So when we took down that dam, I urge all of you to go watch a film that John made called One Dam at a Time. Maybe, Katie, you could put the link in the chat or something modern like that. But One Dam at a Time on YouTube. Look at that and you'll see why this is high gospel for us. So the rules are this. When I started, you could do anything. So the herring are going into the tributaries, and they're going up to the first barrier. They're trying to get above the tide. They're trying to get away from the predators in the river to spawn. And so you'd go up to the dam on the Rondout, the dam on the Esopus. You'd go to any place where these fish were meeting a natural or man-made barrier, and that's where the fishermen were hitting them. They used a net called a scap net, and the fish are just sitting ducks. You know, they have no choice. They're there because their destiny has driven them there, and so they're defenseless. So the fish were taken. They're kept in buckets to keep them live, and a lot of fishermen put a hook through their spine and then put them in the water. And of course, they're disabled, so bass can get them. It's also bad for the bass because the bass will swallow the herring whole, and the hook will catch the bass in the throat. Whereas if you use a lure, you're more likely to lip catch the bass. But your question is the rule. So one of the things that we pushed for early on was a restriction on gill nets and scap nets in the tribs. And the DC, to their credit, posed a rulemaking. We were asked by the DC to go to the public meetings and testify on behalf of the fish. And I would go, and I was alone in a room full of fishermen. And DC stuck to their guns, and now you cannot use a scap net or gill net inside the mouth of a trib. But out in the river, there are subtleties to the rules out in the main body of the river, but that's still a place they can be taken. Once they're in the trib, they can only be caught by jigging. So they've got some protection. To your question, Tracy, they've got some protection. I believe a river, an estuary like the Hudson, should be a sanctuary. We have, I remember Obama, I think, created a huge marine sanctuary out in the Hawaiian Islands. The Hudson is the second biggest estuary after the Chesapeake on the eastern seaboard of North America. And these estuaries are critical spawning grounds and nurseries that support the forage fish that yield this forage fish like shad and herring that are the antelope of the Great Plains of the oceans. They are the food for tuna, bluefish, striped bass. They are an essential. The estuaries are an essential part of the Western Atlantic biomass. And I believe that an estuary like the Hudson should be a sanctuary. And maybe one day we'll get there. Once a fish is in the Hudson, I think it should be protected. Atlantic sturgeon are, because they're on the endangered species list. But it's a shame that we have to drive a species to the brink of extinction before we step up to protect it fully.
Indeed, I totally agree. Thank you for that. And then we have another question, which is, can you speak to a relationship and collaboration we have with the Billy and Oyster Project?
Well, we haven't done that much with them because they stand alone. They do beautiful work. But the young man that's been hired to take my job worked with Billy and Oyster Project and worked on oyster restoration with Billy and Oyster, was there. He's one of the first graduating class of the Harbor School. And the Harbor School, of course, led to the Billy and Oyster Project. So we've assisted in a tangential way. One of the things I did early on was it was called a benthic habitat mapping project. We did it with Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory in Columbia, where we for 4 years, every spring, we towed sonars all over the river from Troy to New York Harbor, and we mapped all the oyster beds in the Tappan Zee. So those maps were used when the Tappan Zee Bridge replacement project happened, and they were going to destroy all those oyster beds. Our maps helped determine how many oyster beds had to be built to compensate the river for the loss. And the Billy and Oyster Project has projects up to the Tappan Zee, up to Croton Point. And we meet them in the river. but we haven't had to work with them. We've tried to have, I wanted, for example, to have a project where we put oysters inside the security zone of the LaGuardia Airport. There, around LaGuardia Airport in the water, there are buoys where if you enter, you're courting an aggressive police officer, a meeting with an aggressive police officer. It's a security zone. Well, the beauty of a security zone is nobody's going to mess with those oysters. So we talked to Billion Oyster Project about a joint project to put oysters there, and in the end, they're doing it without our assistance. So I hope that answers the question. We love them. They haven't needed us, but we've just hired one of their best.
Yeah, they're wonderful partners. And I'll just add that funny story that the Billion Oyster Project grew out of the Harbor School. And the Harbor School was founded by a guy named Murray Fisher, who told me recently that he was inspired to start the Harbor School after serving as an intern for a summer with you, John, at Riverkeeper on the boat. And he said his experience of being on the river and learning from the river and loving the river and learning from you is what inspired the Harbor School, which then birthed the Billion Oyster Project, which then both graduated our incoming captain.
Well, so it's a great story, but it was actually, he was working with John Cronin, my predecessor.
Okay.
And so I met him when we were installing the engine. Murray Fisher was at Peterson's Boatyard, and he was painting for John Cronin. And I've teased him since. I've said, well, it's great that you have a genius for starting schools because you can't paint.
Right. Well, that's good. That's good fact check for me. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of our time. I'm just gonna, encourage people again to, consider coming out and spending time with us in person in 3D at Boscobel on June 20th. It's even more enjoyable than this, and you'll meet our whole team, and the Johns will be there. If you can't make it, please look at our Captain's Fund and consider supporting this important work, and certainly become a member if you're not a member yet. So all those links are back in the chat. I want to end with one final question, which I've actually cribbed from Jon Bowermaster. Credit to Jon Bowermaster. What is the most important lesson you're taking away from a quarter of a century commitment to one very specific place?
That's a question that requires some thought beforehand, actually. But I feel often that working for a river, there's no more noble or grand cause than working for a river. There are equally grand, but there's nothing more grand than working for a river and supporting. It cannot protect itself, and the joy of my job is these thousands and thousands of hours. So we have thousands of engine hours, but we sleep aboard Batu and I 2 weeks a month. We spend so much time with the river that it's not a thing to me. And so working for the Hudson has been a privilege, and there's no grander job.
All right. Well said. And thank you for all your years of amazing service and for being such a great mentor and advocate. And with that, I will thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Jon Bowermaster. Thank you, Katie. Thank you for all the participants. And we hope to connect with you all soon. Have a good night.
Night.
Thank you.